Okay.
I think we have about 54 people joining in thus far, and I think it's a good time to start. So, good afternoon to all the speakers and attendees, and a warm welcome to today's webinar on Indian cities and the race to zero. At COP26 last year, India announced 2070 as its net zero target. While 2070 may seem far off into the future, the mammoth task at hand requires us to act now. It is important for us as a community of consulting engineers and urban practitioners to realize the opportunity and act responsibly to shape our common future. I am Sayan Shom, the sustainability lead for Mott MacDonald in South Asia, and I will be moderating today's session. Few housekeeping rules. Please keep yourselves on mute. Post any questions that you have in the Q&A box, and we will take as many as we can. Over to Dr. Pradhan, President of the Consulting Engineers Association of India, for his introductory remarks.
Thank you very much, Sam. Good afternoon, friends, and welcome everyone participating in today's webinar. As you saw, that it's an important subject, Indian cities and the race to zero. At the outset, let me thank my dear friend, Sri S.S. Acharya Sahab, Managing Director of Mott MacDonald South Asia, and colleagues at Mott MacDonald and Consulting Engineer Association of India for organizing this webinar. This webinar is a collaboration and in partnership with our esteemed member, Mott MacDonald. I heartily welcome all eminent speakers, panelists who will be sharing their knowledge, experiences, and thoughts on this important and challenging topic. To those who are not very familiar with CEI, CEI stands for Consulting Engineer Association of India, and it is the apex body of consulting engineers in India. It represents the Indian engineering consulting professional at the International Federation of Consulting Engineers, which is known as FIDIC. And India or CI has over 500 members. As you understand that with the urban population expected to grow up about 50% in India in few decades from now, the country must be prepared to face the accompanying challenges due to the increase in greenhouse gas, especially CO2 contributing to climate change, air and water pollution, urban transportation, infrastructure, water supply, sanitation, floods, droughts, and their implication on energy and other resources. Densely populated cities in our country are already vulnerable to many of these typically urban issues. Visible impacts of increasingly warmer weathers and cities and urban heat islands are already been felt in India. And so therefore the urban resilience projects need to adopt a series of structural and non-structural measures within the city. While looking for tools to help them implement and maintain such intervention and improve their design, the government should also encourage the citizens' awareness and their engagement in managing or working in the public spaces in many places, many cities. Further, cities need to decarbonize, as mentioned by some, that themselves to meet the net zero emission as been committed by India in COP26 by 2070. Therefore, the availability of finance and technology must be explored to ensure reuse, recycling, repurposing, rehabilitations, recreation, and recovery towards achieving this net zero. You may also like to look at the ongoing projects, which is almost done. Part of is Central Vista Avenue, which you can see is a clear and good projects towards this end. I think those who wanted to go and see, let me know. I'll take you to 3 kilometer, both the sides, 6 kilometer walk and show you what has been done, how the green space has increased, water bodies have been refurbished, rejuvenated. Fantastic project to look at, to give you kind of understanding in this area. I am confident that this presentations and celebration in this webinar is going to be bring out issues and challenges in urban climate resilience and rest towards net zero. With this, I thank you all and I welcome everyone to participate interactively here. Now I request Mr. Acharya, SS Acharya Sir, Managing Director, to please introduce the theme and Mott MacDonald. Thank you very much. The floor is yours, Acharya Sir.
Thank you, Dr. Pradhan, and good afternoon to all attending the webinar. Dr. Pradhan, in fact, when I was talking to him a few days back, he said this is an important topic, and let's do a webinar. And thank you, Dr. Pradhan and CEI for giving us this opportunity to discuss ways to deal with some of the pressing challenges that cities in India will face on the road to net zero. The world cities populations are booming and are expected to be, over 6 billion by 2050. Asia and Africa are urbanizing faster than other regions, and these two continents will account for nearly 90% of the increase in the urban population up to 2050. India's urban population is also expected to grow from current about 480 million to over 800 million by 2050. I think we can guess about, anybody's guess, but at least 4 to 5 new megacities expected by 2030. Several global coordinated actions are underway to tackle the climate change, including in the cities. India is being watched by the world as we have made an announcement of net zero emissions by 2070 in COP26. Cities are engine of growth, hubs of innovation, but they also bear the brunt of adverse impact of the climate change. Nearly 75% of the greenhouse gas emissions are contributed by the cities. Cities around the world are dealing with rising global temperature, sea level rise, and increasing occurrence of extreme weather events such as floods, droughts, and storms. Earlier this year, heat waves in parts of northern India impacted millions of people in one of the most densely populated parts of the world. We all know about what happened in Europe and what's happening in Europe, actually. I mean, cities like, you can look at the right side, Paris or London. They were, the heat wave impacted the whole of Europe. And you have Mumbai, Chennai, more recently Guwahati, Kochi, Ernakulam have been all impacted by floods multiple times in a year, bringing economic activity to near standstill. Going forward, such incidents will become more common and intensify in severity. The adverse impact of these severe climatic events are felt on basic services, physical and social infrastructure, human livelihood, and health, and more so among the vulnerable communities. It's time we recognize cities and urban areas as important stakeholders in our fight with climate change, playing a critical role to support our targets. So the important question is, how can we make our cities ready? Are the Indian cities ready to cope with massive population flux from the rural hinterland and respond to the perils of climate change? How can our cities respond to the call of net zero by 2070? How are governments, urban local bodies, and urban planners preparing to take the massive challenges head on? Cities have complex infrastructure systems involving multiple stakeholders. When things go wrong, the interdependency of the systems operating within the cities, for example, the roads, the railways, the hospitals, schools, energy, water, data network, all lead to an escalating breakdown of services, much like a domino effect. It's advisable to adopt a system approach and look holistically at the services within the cities. Some fundamental questions that the decision makers and urban local bodies need to ask. How can our cities be made more sustainable and resilient without compromising on our economic growth? What kind of mandates are needed to facilitate low carbon intervention to accelerate change? How can new forms of partnership be formed, forced between the government and the private sector, mainly for planning and financing resilient cities? How can system level data and digital platform be used to our advantage? What capacities and capabilities are required for the journey to net zero? How do we ensure equitable distribution of risk and rewards? And while these fundamental questions are answered, we should not lose sight of all the work that that has already been undertaken in this sphere. At Mott MacDonald, we have been involved in many programs in India that have or are contributing to increase resilience, be it sustainable urban transport project, which we have been, I think we helped move for almost 11 years. Climate resilient cities for shared prosperity called CREST. We work for the Foreign Commonwealth Office, Government of UK, climate risk and resilience for 2 Indian cities. Across the world, we are delivering positive, sustainable and social outcome. We are working for the UK government 2050 carbon calculator program, supporting country government to build their own versions of the UK 2050 calculator model. This is a tool which allows users to trial different options for reducing emissions at a faster rate and to build pathways to meet long-term emissions target to 2050. So far, more than 10 countries have joined this program, including India. I think the IIT Mumbai is the nodal body to do this. As we embark on our net zero journey, it's important that national ambitions, targets, and commitments are adequately devolved down to cities. Empowerment of city corporations and availability of resources at the local level is critical in realizing the national targets committed. I'm looking forward to all the discussion today, and I convey my sincere thanks to CEI for organizing this webinar. I'm sure a lot of great insights will be made available to our participants today that in some way will help our cities to become truly resilient. Thank you. Over to you, Sayan.
Thank you, Mr. Acharya, for laying the background of this webinar. We have an exciting lineup of speakers for today. First up is Ms. Shushma Chaudhary. Shushma is the city's practice leader for Mott MacDonald in South Asia. She has over 25 years of experience in leading multiple roles, including governance, project design and planning, project development, management and implementation services for large number of multidisciplinary projects in the urban and transport sector. She has actively worked on resilient cities, economic corridor development and regeneration projects, sustainable transport planning and engineering covering urban roads, airports, metros, railways, and urban international donor-funded projects. Today, Shushma will speak about the importance of urban planning for climate resilience. Over to you, Shushma.
Thank you, Ajay, SS and Sayan, for setting the relevance and the context of this very important topic. And good afternoon, everyone. Today, I'll be presenting my thoughts on the urbanization in context of India, where integrating climate change adaptation and mitigation strategies in urban planning is becoming a crucial aspect of sustainable development. In the next 10 to 20 years, extreme weather events that we currently experience occasionally will become more and more normal. Beyond 20 years, we will see the emergence of chronic long-term climate impacts. Infrastructure owners, operators, and investors need to integrate climate change with their strategic plans to protect against acute events that are already occurring and prepare for the added impact of chronic events in future. So in my presentation today, I'll be looking at evolving needs in light of the rapidly changing environment, the present challenges and dynamic response strategies to deal with the pandemic and disasters, as well as long-term urban planning strategies for future. Globally, urbanization trends are on rise, and as per a UN population report, 90% of the increase in the world's urban population by 2050 will come mainly from the urban areas of 3 countries, India, China, and Nigeria. The COVID-19 pandemic has laid bare the stark inequalities within the cities, with many struggling to survive without secure livelihoods, decent housing, or even access to basic healthcare facilities. The challenges are plenty, from dealing with the issues of sustaining livelihood, increased pollution due to high GHG emissions, stressed infrastructures, and managing development priorities dealing with the climate and disaster events. India is one of the fastest urbanizing countries in the world. And post-COVID urbanism is a challenge to all city and regional planners and the government planning authorities. However, these challenges also present opportunities for building resilience through our planning processes. In addition to the dynamic response strategies for bouncing back from COVID, we need to start looking at a long-term planning needs with evolving perspectives of developing compact, sustainable, and resilient cities. The crisis has empowered digital platforms like never before, looking at it from online working to the virtual conferencing and the way we have adapted, it's been much faster. This has also provided opportunity for the use of digital technology for effective city planning, effective governance through informed decision support systems, reducing life cycle costs of asset creation and management, where BIM, digital twins, etc., can play a very important role, and also for improving the service delivery to the citizens. So, what is climate resilience? There are many definitions by various agencies, but we at Mott MacDonald believe that climate resilience is the capacity of a system to absorb the stresses imposed by the climate change and respond and evolve into a more robust state. And in the next few slides, I would be taking you through some of the short-term and long-term planning strategies. In the post-COVID world, it will be imperative to draw upon the learnings from the current pandemic and disasters faced by the city due to climate events, and urban planning and development should be revisited through regional, city, neighborhood building scales, which all requires new thinking and fresh perspective. So we all noticed that the current pandemic saw that our systems struggle to deal with the surges in the demand of basic facilities. As an example, for healthcare, many cities responded to the need by creating temporary facilities to meet this demand. Moving forward, surge capacity planning should be integral to planning so as to deal with the climate events and build flexibility for need-based expansion with more adaptable design of building, and also use of modern construction technology and digital tools for faster construction. This is where BIM, artificial intelligence, virtual reality can play a very important role. Another important aspect is for such situations are effective supply chain management planning, leveraging on the data portals. This helps in better decision making to build resilience through improved collaboration. Also, it would be important to build infrastructure resilience for ensuring operational safety and allow asset owners to restore and provide essential services through infrastructure epidemiology planning. Important aspects to be looked here would be to look at risk assessment, preparedness, and contingency planning, and developing standard operating procedures for different infrastructures with different risk level scenarios, and dynamic modeling catering to surges as well as flexible and adaptive designs. And this aspect is also equally important, and there should be given due focus for planning city emergency services, for providing essential services. And a real-time updation of these could be done through digital platforms such as urban observatories, integrated transport platforms. Next slide, yeah. In this slide, I've tried to capture some futuristic strategies vital for the sustainable urban planning and development. And this is very much in sync with what we at Mott MacDonald Cities Practice have been advocating to build a better future for the urban dwellers. This further builds upon various thought pieces from the global think tanks in the urban space. Increased city regional planning is an emerging aspect which looks at distributing economic development much beyond the city boundaries to its suburbs and the adjacent rural area, which can help in decongesting the cities. And this could be achieved through promoting transit-oriented development and use of public transport and active mobility, connecting the cities with the nearby rural communities and shortening the supply chains. Again, greening cities offer a great opportunity to boost livelihood and living standards. And it's an excellent way for cities to address climatic challenges. And there needs to be focus, of course, on the access to the core services such as water, housing, and healthcare when we are planning for density. And healthy cities also promote opportunities for well-being. And what we really also require, I think there's a lot more scope for us here in India to work on it, that the city level requires creation of more granular data, and a strong digital infrastructure at the local level can inform long-term planning through a data-driven approach. So hence, I believe that the connection between integrated city regional planning approach, promoting green and resilient infrastructure, and health can then be used to build resilient cities. We need to focus both on adaptation and mitigation measures to build the resilience. And the approach should look at addressing current risks and vulnerabilities, creating awareness about climate risks and generate demand. We should look at a bottom-up approach, demonstrate resilience projects to generate interest amongst urban local bodies and other decision makers, look at generating a multi-sectoral information and a shelf of critical infrastructure, looking at building sustainability aspects in planning, looking at demand management and green infrastructure, and building synergy and partnerships with state and national institutions as well as private sector. This is the framework following the international best practices, and it has been developed by Mott MacDonald to capture high-level steps and tasks that should be taken to aid Indian cities in planning and taking actions to increase climate resilience. This will enable the integration of climate resilience into city planning, design and operation, as well as into the policies and programs. And this framework can be tailored to city-specific needs, objectives, and local contexts, and has been successfully applied by Mott MacDonald to a range of projects across multiple countries and programs worldwide. So as suggested, overarching climate resilience roadmaps covering short, medium, and longer-term priority actions can be considered for integrating the climate resilience framework into city planning and policy. This focuses on understanding the requirements of stakeholders, scoping, defining the climate risk, climate impact assessments, what are the strategies and plans that could be delivered for us to get the optimum value for the city, and effective implementation and monitoring. And I think with this, I will stop here. And over to Sayan.
Yeah, thank you, Sushma, for the detailed presentation. You've touched upon various aspects that urban planners today need to consider while planning for the short, medium, and long term. With this, we move from the panel, which is largely in Delhi, to my colleague, Shala McGavick in Singapore. Shala is a principal hydrologist with Mott MacDonald with a decade's experience in the delivery and management of flood risk and water resources projects. She's focused on resilience projects that deliver social, economic, and environmental outcomes. She's currently leading flood resilience projects in Ho Chi Minh City and Bangkok as a part of the Global Future Cities Southeast Asia program for the UK Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. Over to you, Shala.
Thank you very much for the introduction. So today I'm going to be focusing on digital interventions for urban flood management. So as I'm sure you're all aware, stormwater flooding is one of the key challenges that cities are facing, and it's only going to increase under climate change without action. So I'm focusing in on stormwater flooding, which is the flooding that occurs when you have an intense rainfall downpour. So not so much looking at river or coastal flooding, but specifically stormwater flooding, which is really one of the key urban problems. It's not always as severe as river flooding, but it's much more frequent, and it's definitely on the increase. So the impacts of this are, traffic disruption, economic health, social impacts. They're really, really far ranging, and they're exacerbated by a lot of different factors. So high river and tidal levels, rubbish blocking drainage networks, of course, urbanization as the permeability of the ground decreases, population growth, and as I mentioned before, of course, climate change. The type of events that cause this type of flooding are not only becoming more frequent, but also more intense. So really it's compounding the issue. And these events are particularly hard to forecast. So with rivers, you get a bit of a lead time as the flood comes down the catchment. But these events are really very rapid. So the rainfall forms rapidly, which means it's hard to forecast. And the flooding happens almost immediately, which adds to the problem there. So we really don't have much time to plan or prepare the action when these sorts of events occur. The flooding is also very localized. So with river flooding, it starts from the river and it moves in from that point. But with stormwater flooding, it can occur nearly anywhere, and that will be impacted by things like drainage network condition, the location of the rain itself, and things like blockages in the network. So it's really very challenging to know exactly where and when these sorts of events are going to happen. And that's where digital tools can really help us. So I'm going to be talking about a project that we have delivered in Bangkok as part of the UK government's Global Future Cities programme. So the aim of the programme is to deliver targeted technical interventions that deliver social and environmental outcomes as well. And so the end user for this project is the Bangkok Metropolitan Administration, or BMA. So that's a local government in Bangkok who has the responsibility for managing drainage and stormwater flooding. Prior to this intervention, basically the flood response is very reactive. So flooding happens and they send out their teams to try and address the problem where they can, but that's often not quick enough. And also the data was previously stored in different locations and quite hard to access in real time. So we developed a flood management decision support system on a web-based platform that brings together all of their sources of rainfall and flooding data in one system. We undertook improvements to the radar network so that they can now access that in real time. And that's a localized rainfall radar forecasting system. So the kind of rainfall events that cause this flooding aren't well picked up by national systems. They're really very localized events that you can't see coming from a distance. So you really need local infrastructure and a local system to pick these up. We then applied machine learning to a hydraulic model to provide real-time flood forecasting. So flood forecasting maps that are produced immediately and output at a 10-minute interval. So this is something that's never been done before. We quite often have machine learning for individual sensors and for smaller locations, but actually to provide these real-time flood maps is something quite innovative. And what that means is that the city can really target their response operations. So rather than waiting for the flooding to happen, they just have that bit of extra lead time so they can send out their teams to unblock drains or just to check on the condition of drains. So they can have their teams in place with temporary flood barriers or sandbags, and also so that they can provide flood warning to the communities. So this is really about enabling the city to cope when flooding does occur. Of course, we want to prevent flooding where possible, but I think people are starting to realize that we can't prevent all flooding. We need to learn how to cope, how to be resilient when these events actually happen. So this is providing real-time insights to the local authority. You can see the interface here on my screen at the moment. This just shows how the data is displayed. So it's in a web-based platform with a geospatial interface that you can interrogate at any location. And this can be used by multiple stakeholders. So it could be used by different government departments, or it could be expanded out to link to a public interface. We also have flood warning alarms based on rainfall triggers. So that means that the operations can be targeted. So the Flood Operation Control Center, they get a warning and they can immediately start acting on that. So where's this going in the future? So this is just one example. This is a pilot that we developed within Bangkok. But really, Bangkok, I think, is quite representative of the situation that a lot of our cities around the world, and of course in India, are facing. So as I mentioned, stormwater flooding, it's increasing, it's becoming more intense, and we need to learn how to act. And really bringing the data together is the first point. And there's really quite a long way we can go with this. And what we'd want to be doing is linking in with other systems, as my colleagues were saying in their previous presentations. We want to be thinking about cities as systems. So this can be linked into traffic and transportation digital twins. It can be linked in with operations. We can link it with social data so that we can protect our most vulnerable communities, or environmental data so that we can identify opportunities for nature-based solutions. And on the digital side, we also have a lot that we can do with machine learning, things like blockage detection and other types of forecasting. And basically what this means, it's not just about data, it's about finding the insights in the data and being able to enable really rapid and evidence-based decisions. So it's moving beyond just having the information or the data, but really being able to make solid decisions for more resilient cities. And I believe I'm now at time, so thank you all very much, and I'd be happy to take any questions that you have. Thank you.
Thanks, Shala. Thank you for the presentation. It clearly demonstrates how the digital frontier can open ways and means to better decisions that not only protect us from the vagaries of climate change, but also will help us in delivering climate positive outcomes as well. Next on the next speaker today is Mr. Anurag Satpathy, who is the International Development Lead for Mott MacDonald in South Asia. He oversees a portfolio of international development projects and programs across India, Bangladesh, and Nepal. Anurag has extensive experience in portfolio and project management, capacity building, and institutional development. Prior to Mott MacDonald, Anurag used to work for the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, the British High Commission in New Delhi. In his previous capacity as the head of the Urban Prosperity Program, he has led the design and delivery of multi-million-pound, multi-year programs in the urban and infrastructure sector. Over to you, Anurag.
Thank you, Sayan. Good afternoon, all, and good morning to those who have joined from the US. Thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts on this interesting topic of business case for sustainable cities and why it makes sense to make our cities not just sustainable, but also inclusive and resilient. Half of the humanity, which is roughly 3.5 billion people, live in cities today. And it is projected that 5 million people will be living in cities by 2030. Because the future will be urban for a majority of people, the solutions to some of the greatest issues faced by humans, poverty, climate change, healthcare, education, must be found in city life. There are a number of pressing challenges that cities face today. 833 million people live in slums, and this number keeps rising. The levels of urban energy consumption and pollution are also worrying. Cities occupy just 3% of the Earth's land, but account for 60 to 80% of energy consumption and 75% of carbon emissions. Many cities are also more vulnerable to climate change and natural disasters. The cost of poorly planned urbanization can be seen in some of the huge slums, tangled traffic, greenhouse emissions, and sprawling suburbs all over the world. By choosing to act sustainably, we choose to build cities where all citizens live a decent quality of life and form a part of the city's productive dynamic, creating shared prosperity and social stability without harming the environment. The cost to put sustainable practices in place is minimum in comparison with the benefits. For example, there is a cost of creating a functional public transport network, but the benefits are huge in terms of economic activity, quality of life, the environment, and the overall success of a networked city. SDG 11 of the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals focuses on sustainable cities and communities and promotes inclusive and sustainable urbanization. It involves investment in public transport, creating green public spaces, and improving urban planning and management in participatory and inclusive ways. SDG 11 has some targets linked, for example, ensuring access for all to adequate, safe, and affordable housing, access to safe, affordable, accessible, and sustainable transport systems for all, reducing the adverse per capita environmental impact of cities, including by paying special attention to air quality and waste management, In India, to measure India's performance towards the goal of sustainable cities, 8 national level indicators have been identified. The current slide shows these 8 indicators in bullets, which capture 3 out of the 10 SDG targets for 2030. The Government of India does a composite index scoring of the states and union territories on this goal. And currently, Punjab and Chandigarh are the top performers among the states and UTs respectively. Talking about businesses, it is equally important for business to adopt SDG 11 as well. Historically, businesses have been the core of development of cities, livelihoods, and services to urban population. Business operating in these cities and contributing to the overall economic prosperity by providing income and revenue have a responsibility and opportunity to support infrastructural development. They can help cities, state, and central governments develop clear, actionable plans to navigate through these complex challenges. In this regard, Mott MacDonald, as a global engineering, management, and development consulting firm, has been delivering several international development programs in the field of urban development and sustainable cities, working with various donor agencies, city, state, and national governments to deliver inclusive, resilient, and sustainable urban solutions. To highlight one specific program, Mott MacDonald is delivering one of the UK government's FCDO flagship program in India, the Sustainable Cities for Shared Prosperity. The program delivers on 3 broad objectives, namely overcoming barriers to investment into urban sector, supporting cities in policy and institutional reforms, building skills of relevant urban stakeholders so they are better skilled in the delivery of urban interventions, and instituting innovation interventions that improve collaboration between urban actors, disseminating lessons for both domestic and international experience in inclusive, resilient, and sustainable urbanization. Since the launch in 2019, the program has provided targeted technical assistance to select states and cities, namely Pune, Bengaluru, Visakhapatnam, Chennai, and Surat. The concept of sustainable cities become even more important when we reimagine our cities to achieve net zero emissions. India's commitment to achieve net zero emissions by 2070 depends heavily on the ability of its cities to transition to low carbon systems. Beyond the contribution to sustainability goals and targets, low carbon urbanization can also provide economic and socio-co benefits for Indian cities. We are aware of the multiple challenges for Indian cities to commit to low carbon transitions, but with much of India's urban infrastructure yet to be built, there is an opportunity for Indian states to address this and to make a low carbon trajectory both possible and achievable. Cities should focus on some important aspects to really plan for low carbon transitions, some of which could be adopting a systems approach. For example, emissions in cities are really driven by systems that transcend local boundaries and jurisdictions, such as energy, economies, infrastructure, and transport. Systems approach therefore becomes crucial to adequately address regional emissions. Strengthening local government capacities is equally important, where city officials need to be trained on climate-sensitive urban planning. Third, prioritizing integrated planning, where spatial planning plays an essential role in influencing the way cities are built and therefore is a key factor to consider when talking about urban emissions. Tailoring plans to address local environmental contexts is equally important. Institutionalizing frameworks for data collection and sharing, wherein data from various agencies must be shared with planners and urban decision makers in a timely manner. Creating space for coordinated government action, wherein innovative government approaches need to be put in place so that the various city level agencies can coordinate their approaches. Urban living labs or spaces that bring together government, policymakers, and residents on key thematic issues to facilitate discussion through workshops can help in addressing institutional silos. It is really not an option, but imperative for cities to plan their interventions and develop business cases for their projects, mainstreaming aspects of sustainability, inclusivity, and resilience. In this regard, the 5 case business model tool provides decision makers and stakeholders with a proven framework for structured thinking and assurance that the project provides strategic fit and is supported by a compelling case for change, will maximize public value to society through the selection of the optimal combination of components, products, and related activities, is commercially viable and attractive to the supply side, is affordable and is fundable over time, and can be delivered successfully by the organization and its partner. We at Mott MacDonald have extensive experience of using the 5Ks business model globally and used it to develop the strategic and outline business cases for the 5 high-value urban infrastructure projects under the FCDO-funded Sustainable Cities for Shared Prosperity program. And we will be very happy to share our learnings with stakeholders who are interested in exploring this further. Thank you very much. Sayan, over to you.
Thanks, Anurag, for the presentation. What you talked about in terms of economic and social co-benefits, it's definitely certain things that we need to look at while we develop our net zero cities, and perhaps also the realization has to be that growth and carbon emissions can be decoupled, and perhaps we can see green growth really fueling growth going forward. We will delve into that more so in the next session. But before that, we'll try and take up some questions for this. Trisha, over to you. We have, I think, a couple of questions.
Yeah, so we have a question from
Yeah, unmute, please.
I cannot hear you.
Yeah.
can you hear me?
Yeah.
You yourself.
So can you hear me? Yeah. So
Yeah, sure.
yeah. So Shyam Sundar Khandelwal, his question is whether climate resilient urban development includes reducing travel demand by integrated planning and implementation and promoting online meetings and more, virtual conversations by government and other offices and organizations.
Yes, any of the three speakers, maybe Shushma, would you want to take it up, or Anurag?
Now, did you hear the question?
No.
So can you speak, now, because we are unable to hear, can you repeat it?
Let me repeat that. Whether climate resilient urban development includes reducing travel demand by integrated planning and implementation and promoting online meetings, online solutions by government, etc. Maybe Shushma, it's for you. It's transport.
Yeah. I think, can you hear me?
Yes, clear.
Yeah. So I think definitely this would go a long way when we're looking at this integrated transit solutions, and you bring in the digital to it, wherein we are looking at improving efficiencies, reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. I think that will definitely be a part when we're looking at the resilient infrastructure planning.
Yeah, go ahead. No. You're right.
Yeah.
So, the next question is, what measures will eliminate the energy requirements of urban transportation and air conditioning?
Anurag, would you want to take that up? I think that's a very positive and a utopian question. Yeah, so.
The question.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
So this is really a very interesting question. Just to focus on urban transportation, it is really in terms of how we design our transport systems in a city. So for example, currently a lot of cities are now moving from diesel-powered buses to e-buses now. So that's the sort of transition which a lot of cities are currently undertaking. And if you see in Amsterdam, in Rotterdam as well, in the Netherlands, they have the entity which is responsible for public transportation. They are now moving to a space where they are committed to transition all their public transport modes to a net zero by 2030. So those are the kind of measures which city are really undertaking, and something which in India also something needs to be thought of on similar lines. For example, if you talk of Delhi as well, so the Delhi government has recently procured a number of e-buses. So that's the sort of steps which cities are currently undertaking, including through the smart city mission as well, where this particular aspect was given a lot of focus. So there is a shift in the way the transition from using fossil fuel powered public transport systems to green hydrogen or electric vehicles. So that sort of transition, that is extremely important for at least to really eliminate or to reduce the energy requirements of urban transportation.
And I would also like to add on this that, in addition to the public transit modes that we should be adopting more and more using the greener fuels, I think it's also very important that we also look at sustainable transport, building on the NMT and looking at creating that cycle infrastructure for the closer neighborhood proximities where where they have the choice, they should be able to adopt that. So this SUTP project, which Acharya mentioned at the beginning of the program, I think so this was exactly one of the mandates that it was the first program of India wherein in Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs along with UNDP and World Bank, they looked at getting in this program where they identified Indian cities. There were 5 main cities, but then there were 23 other cities wherein the learnings were also shared and put together. So there was a lot of focus on making the people aware about these sustainable choices and then building the capacity of the urban local bodies there. So I think when you go today, very recently I was visiting the city of Mysore, which almost for 10 years we've been working, and this is God. And I could see that, this whole there is a very nice mix of the choices of sustainable modes, wherein at one end we are looking at increased public transport. At the same time, there are these, NMT corridors, cycle corridors. There are more and more people coming forward and using it. So I think there is a balanced mix. That's
there's also, it's not only in those major cities.
Yeah.
Even you look at ADB is supporting the smaller city like Aizawl, where we have been awarded actually a project, water project preparatory to look at sustainable urban transport mode in cities like Aizawl in Northeast.
I think let me just come in because what Mr. Paritosh Gupta was probably trying, because he is a former member Delhi Jal Board, former chairman of Central Pollution Control Board, and he is a great mentor, and to do that, I think his perspective, because he lives in Delhi and you know that how come you move people from the individual transport to the public transport system, MRT systems like that, because Delhi is contribute almost 40% of pollution. If you look at through transport air pollutions, and that's probably he's coming at. And the other aspect he mentioned about air conditioning, I think that's the one issue probably Anurag or somebody can answer if you have anything on the how to ensure that use of air conditioning to reduce the heat impact, or what do you call, like what you see in Gurgaon and some other cities, it adds to the heat island component. Thanks. You can go ahead, Trisha. I think we can do that afterwards. That's interesting.
Yeah, I think talk about particularly on that, on how do you discourage people to, on their own, traveling on their own single-use car. I think it's more like the congestion charges and things like that has to happen. It might take a little more time actually before you do that. Unless you create the public infrastructure, I think you just can't force people to not use. I think it might take a little time, but I think places like Delhi, where we've got almost 400 kilometers of now metros. I think things are improving. I think still there is a long way to go. I mean, we're still not. We just can't do it like what London has done or something. And you need to, possibly forcing people to do it. And when you create those infrastructure and the last mile connectivity is also quite critical. I think we are yet to get there. Once you do that, I think people will start. I mean, if you look at people, I mean, almost about what? I mean, a significant amount, 3-4 million of people, people take to the metros today. I mean, which was not the case. I mean, but I think I think the question is very, very, I think it's quite important for us, I think, and the policymakers to start to look at. It's about how do you start to think about, people not to use, I mean, those people using, their own car and that's really creating a problem for us. But unless you create that public infrastructure, I don't think that we can.
The last mile connectivity. And I think I've just like to add a point on the reduction of power demand. I think so that is something I did touch upon in my presentation earlier, that the focus largely is the asset creation rather than the life cycle costing. And when we are looking at overall life cycle costing, I think that is where I think at the initial planning stages, it becomes more and more important that we do enough due diligence. And there are ways and means, there are, energy modeling that could be looked at to see what could be the, ways to optimize the energy. Then the choice of building materials that can come in there, which may have, say, initial capital cost, which will be slightly higher, but then overall life cycle costing would get reduced and resulting in those optimized power demands also.
Trisha, I think maybe we can take just one more question before we may move on to the next session.
Okay, so we have a question for Sharla. It says, basically we have talked about, predicting rain and flooding due to heavy rains. But what about prevention or even harvesting the natural phenomenon of rain? So is it possible in an already built city to make something like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And of course, we definitely need to be looking at flood prevention as well as living with flooding. And really, I think we need to look at the whole toolbox that we have available to us. So sustainable urban drainage systems, blue-green infrastructure. These are all really valuable tools. Retrofitting, it can be done. It's obviously once a city is there and developed, it's harder and it's more expensive. But we also need to look at the different magnitude of events. So, for example, rainwater harvesting, that can be really valuable for the smaller, more frequent events. But when we're looking at what we used to call a 1 in 100-year flood, the funding just isn't there really to prevent all of that. And that's why we need all of these tools together. So it's the resilience and the living with flooding is one aspect in that toolbox. And also, being able to bounce back more quickly after the flooding happens. So really, we need a multi-pronged approach to really be able to tackle this. But yeah, of course, we definitely need blue-green infrastructure, sustainable drainage systems. We need all of them together really to make our cities more resilient to flooding. I hope that answered your question.
Thanks, Sharla. And thank you to all the speakers thus far. Now we would move to the second segment of the webinar, which is the panel discussion. We have 3 eminent panelists from the academia and
Sayan, just a second. That I think there's some question not answered. I think we need to really take those questions and send them answers, offline.
Yeah, we will send them written answers. We have definitely taken note of the questions, and we'll send written answers. So we have three panelists for the panel discussion. Next up, which is essentially that how can we join hands in this movement towards net zero? I have with me here Professor Dev Niyogi. Professor Niyogi is a professor in the Department of Geological Sciences, Jackson School of Geosciences, and also a professor at the Department of Civil, Architectural, and Environmental Engineering, Cockrell School of Engineering. Dr. Niyogi was the most recent chair of the American Meteorological Society Board of Urban Environment and elected advisory board member of the International Association of Urban Climate. Dr. Niyogi has provided invited testimonies to the National Academy Study Group, planning summer meetings and Senate working groups. Next panelist is Professor Shashwat Bandyopadhyay. Professor Bandyopadhyay, Project Director, Center of Urban Planning and Policy, CPT Research and Development Foundation, and he is currently professor at the Faculty of Planning, CPT University. He has over 25 years of experience in the urban development sector in the South Asian region, with a focus on sustainable urban development, climate and disaster risk reduction, integration of land use and infrastructure, nature-based solutions, and the management of historic cities. Dr. Bandyopadhyay has previously also worked with Mott MacDonald in the past in various urban planning projects. The last panelist we have is Mr. Shubhabrata Haldar, who is the technical lead for climate and urban planning at Mott MacDonald in India. He has advised across a range of sectors, namely smart cities, transportation, water supply, waste management, industrial townships, land value capture and monetization. He has had wide exposure from planning, designing, financial structuring to delivery across the urban development and the transportation space. Now, my first question is to Mr. Haldar, and we understand this net zero journey is at a nascent phase if we took of the Indian urban spectrum, and so what kind of structural and institutional barriers are faced by Indian cities in order to achieve carbon neutrality?
Okay, thank you, Sayan, and good evening all. There are several barriers, but I could highlight probably in the paucity of time a few. So as mentioned in the previous sessions, a city operates as a complex system of systems involving a number of organizations who are responsible for energy, transportation, water, sanitation, housing, healthcare, education, etc. Now, unless all these agencies come together to set a common target and a roadmap to achieve their respective as well as collective goals, a comprehensive city-level decarbonization or low-emission development strategy cannot be achieved. Now, let me take an example. Let us consider the two of the largest sources of urban emission, energy and transport. An urban local body which is responsible for managing, primarily responsible for managing the city, has hardly any say on the fuel that is used for supplying power to the city, or the fuel used by most of the vehicles that move around the city. They have some influence on the public transport part of it, but not on the others. So when you have multiple institutions setting and achieving a common city level climate change mitigation objective, it often becomes a big challenge. Secondly, any effort at decarbonization, it has to start with mapping and quantification of GHG sources. Now, it would not be out of place to say that there is lack of awareness of internationally accepted tools for developing GHG inventories, the concept of scopes for reporting emissions, undertaking the climate change risk assessments, developing city climate action plans, accessing green finance, etc. So capacity of city officials need to be augmented in these areas. And lastly, climate change responses largely remain in the realm of voluntary actions. In the absence of legal or regulatory pressures, there is not much accountability on the part of GHG emitters, as well as the city authorities in achieving the decarbonization targets. So we need to introduce an element of enforceability and accountability in meeting these targets. So these are some of the key structural and institutional barriers in my view. Thank you. Back to Sayan.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Haldar. I would move on to Professor Niyogi. Very good morning, Professor Niyogi. So my question to you is, how can Indian cities be made more resilient and sustainable while not compromising on economic growth? And when I say that, can we decouple growth and emissions? Or better still, can we have decarbonization of fuel growth?
Well, thank you for the question, and good afternoon, good evening to everyone. I've actually been enjoying the conversations and really insightful pointers being laid out by other speakers as well. So thank you for the invitation. The question you raise about the aspect of sustainable cities and the development of economy in the context of what we could do by decoupling carbonization, there are at least three things that I would like to highlight. The first one is that cities are a growth engine. There are several studies which say that there's a range of 1:10 to 1:15 investment output, that if you put $10 in a city, 10 rupees in a city, you expect 100 rupees or $100 out of it. So there is a development that is anticipated from the city, and that is why cities have been built in the first place. Secondly, when we are trying to develop the growth, we have thus far looked at the climate footprint in the context of emissions, and we have to somehow use additional metric beyond just emissions. It could be either in the context of heat, some of the flood vulnerability work we talked about. It could be in the context of the livability with how people are exposed to pollutants and so forth. So if you expand the definition of what is the climate footprint of the city beyond greenhouse emissions, then you can come up with some other targeted aspects, which could be more on the adaptative or adaptation measures. And a combination of those adaptation and some combination of alternative fuels or emission reduction measures together can make the city much more attractive as a climate resilient pathway while we are still building economy. So in summary, what I'm saying is expand the definition of what is the climate footprint of the city. Second, target on those aspects which are much more localized, and those could be beyond greenhouse emissions. And third, look for examples of where there could be some localized benefits that can be shown, and those are scalable. So those could be the three ways we could try to decouple the notion that economic growth is bad for the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Niyogi. Thanks for that. Very interesting to note the perspective in terms of adding additional metrics to judge how climate is getting impacted, and the impact that is being felt with the citizens. Such. I'll go back to Mr. Haldar again, and this is again around barriers that we spoke about. Now, in order to perhaps overcome such barriers or circumvent such barriers, what kind of mandates are required to drive adoption of low carbon interventions?
Okay. So one of the emerging things that are happening are the climate action plans and low emission development strategies. Now, these are being pioneered in select cities. But what I feel is that instead of developing the climate action plans and the traditional master plans and development plans in isolation, often led by different agencies, as is being done in the case of Delhi, future master plans could themselves embed climate response by including GHG emissions forecast and climate risk assessment as vital elements. So these could help to prioritize the master plan interventions with maximum mitigation as well as the adaptation and hazard reduction kind of potentials. So this is something that would need a paradigm shift in the way our master plans are being conducted henceforth. Secondly, an empowered institutional mechanism should also need to be created, taking on from the point that I made earlier, given the multiplicity of agencies. So this agency at an apex level would drive a common climate goal across different organizations which are involved in service delivery and governance in a city. Something similar to the Unified Metropolitan Transport Authority concept, one could say. Such coordinated mechanisms could also help a city to be more resilient and recover faster or bounce back after a flood or cyclone or some other calamity.
Mm-hmm.
Another tool could be procurement to stimulate low carbon interventions. For example, tenders can be decided on life cycle cost basis with certain weightage on green outcomes over the project life, instead of the conventional L1 approach where you decide only on the basis of the upfront cost of the project. Now, all of these would go through an evolutionary process, and hence capacity building of public agencies and awareness building should go on. I mean, these are some of the key imperatives to the current context. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Haldar. We lost you towards the end of it, but I got the overall gist of what you want to say. And now let me bring in Professor Bandyopadhyay into the discussion. Good afternoon, Professor. So my question to you, it's building on what Mr. Haldar added on this. So how can we perhaps work around with the urban development policies and building regulations to drive this adoption or this movement going forward?
Yeah, thank you, Shayan, and good evening, good afternoon, or good morning to all panelists and participants. Thank you very much, and it's also a pleasure to reconnecting back with the organization where I started my journey post graduation. So thank you very much to largely I can see Acharya, Shubho, and few others, and so thanks very much to reconnect. Just let me give you a quick context, and that's how before I get into the urban policy, because and particularly as a part of this high-level committee on urban development, we are trying to relook at the urbanization process and what are the implications on urban space. And there are two kind of data figure that have come out. One is from the NITI, saying that by 2036, we are expecting about 60 crore or 600 million. And another very recently through the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, we are looking at about 80 crore or 800 million by 2047. Now, what it means in terms of space, and if you look in terms of space, I was just looking at the residential space, which was close to about, we are producing close to about 16 billion square meter in 2017-18, and probably, and we are expecting this to grow close to about 25 billion square meter. And challenge is that much of this built up space delivery will be coming from DIY sector, like do it yourself sector or self-built housing sector. Now, this is what one of the larger challenge that one has to look at it when you are looking at a kind of race to net zero. And giving this, much of it, like almost close to all of us know, like commissioning, running, and deconstructing building, it is all close to about 38% GHGs are being contributed by this sector. So it is a quite a tough challenge that, and largely our national policies, national mission that we have rolled out have rarely touched upon or very, very superficially have touched upon the aspects of net zero or decarbonization, particularly from I'm talking about the policies or missions pertaining to urban development and urban areas, a little bit here and there by smart cities and climate smart, bearing them. Largely the other missions which are driving and supporting, whether it is Amrut and other, that is quite limited. Having said so, but in the state level regulation, as you know, the urban is in subject of a state subject, and where the state level regulations matter a lot. Here, most of the states are moving from municipal building bylaws to a combined, urban development regulation. And there has been some instances of some encouragement of, green building or green related development. Although so far this is largely limited to the building, not to beyond the building and local area level, but there has been some convergence. And there are also some kind of a like Econivas Samhita. There are a few other regulations which is now come into place. So I see there are some movement taking place, but the opportunity, what we are losing out is what Shubho just mentioned in the earlier. At one city, we are creating many plans. Some of it is a statutory frame like a master plan and development plan. Then we have an overlay strategic plan. And out of excitement, we are creating more and more. The paradox is there. One time we are complaining that our cities don't have capacity, cities don't have resources. At the same time, all of us are together putting more and more pressure by bringing multi-dimensional strategic instrument. So we need a framework to convert them, strengthen them, because in long term, if you look at some of these issues, when you say climate and other, the essentially a longish term issues to tackle, the statutory planning process that we have, whatever form. I know there are a lot of criticism we have, but statutory form of planning that is the only instrument which is such a longer tenure. For example, 15 years, 20 years. So tackling a long-term instrument of a long-term problem challenge like this, you have to bring closer and strengthen the statutory planning processes. Because we have seen experiences of Surat. Surat was one city, kept on preparing city resilience plans since early days, early 2010 and so forth. Now, if you go back and look at the city and then realize that those lessons, those proposals have somewhere in the back burner, city has moved its own trajectory. Only thing that stands today is mainly the statutory planning process and their annual budget. So we have to really relook at urban policies, urban regulations, if we are very serious, because presently we see a lot of workshops like this and where we are discussing, but if you want to do them, if you want to, instill them in the process, then we have to go back, look at the state regulations, state policies, and state spatial planning process. Because what Dr. Niyogi was mentioning, even much of this, if you want to really realign, then we have to really relook how are we building, what is our, what are you producing, both in agriculture and manufacturing, and how we are transporting ourselves. And if this needs to be realigned in a spatial context, the best tool I can see is about, strengthening spatial planning processes and not making a multiple institution, because then, we are creating a sense of chaos. But the opportunities are, because now, most of the states are revisiting their statutory planning process, particularly after Niti Aayog's report and subsequent comments from the Honorable Prime Minister. There's also states are reorganizing their regulatory processes, like building town planning regulation, building regulation. One thing where I think we need to also focus the regulatory regime. What has happened is most of the states have inherited town and country planning regulation, which all over India, came around 60s and 70s. And most of them need to be revisited, relooked at it, because, if you want to really prepare ourselves for next 20, 30 years, we need to really revisit the mandatory act and regulation like town and country planning regulation in most of the states. So thank you, and over to you, Sayan. Sorry, a bit of longish response from me.
Thanks, Professor Bandyopadhyay. Interesting points coming out there. The legacy plans that need to be revisited, most certainly. I'll come back to you again for the next question, which I believe is pretty close to the work that you do, and this is around capacity building. So how can local governments and urban local bodies, be upskilled to undertake climate resilient planning and infrastructure development going forward?
Is this for me, Sayan?
Yes, this is for you.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I think that's one area is that, we have to start kind of a differential approach, because what happens in that most of the time I go to Delhi, I listen we all call about urban local bodies. And in 2011, we have 7,900 plus. But these urban local bodies require certain microzonation. For example, if you look at it, if you classify them not in the census classification, but in terms of economic production or real estate activities, you classify them in terms of tier 1, tier 2. Tier 1, if you see the RBI banks classify or the real estate guys classify, there are only about 7-8 towns. And there I see a lot of enthusiasm about preparing an additional climate action plan. But unfortunately, there are about tier 2, about 100, 110 towns and cities. These are like cities like Mirzapur, cities like Bardhaman, Durgapur, and places like that where no one dares to visit. Now, if you look at the urbanization trajectory, is happening is these tier 2 cities are going to be a kind of future level where a lot of actions are going to come. And these towns, the opportunity is there that these towns are not really like Delhi, Mumbai, those classical problems of transportation. There is a lot of opportunity to intervene. And I'm not talking about tier 3. Government of India, the RBI classifies which are not under tier 1 and tier 2, they are all tier 3. But these tier 3s are also enormously challenging. These are our hill towns, these are our island towns, pilgrim towns, faith towns. For example, now, after the Europe is not accessible this summer, you see the hordes of planes are now offloading them to places like Leh. And it's a small municipal council receiving plane loads of traffic every day, struggling with water. So I think we have to now shift the narrative. It's very easy. I mean, because, we often joke in planning school, planners don't go where there is no airport. But now I think we have to go from airport to rail station, to bus station, to auto station. We have to now do this. And this upscaling would require substantial amount of re-engineering the way we are training our planners, the way we are, much of our domain we learned, neighborhood policies and all this came from USA or European style, but now we have to create our own narrative to understand, deal with, because the processes are much more challenging. The issues are embedded with a lot of legacy and land related. So one is, yes, there is much more requirement for upskilling ourselves, but that has to be separated from American way of doing urban design. But we have to do how Jhumri Talaiya does urban design, or what Jhumri Talaiya interprets or Bardhaman interprets those urban design. I think that's the kind of mile we have to reorient ourselves. The discourses about climate has to move from tier 1 to tier 2, and also you have to prepare tier 3. This tier 2 and tier 3, especially tier 2, would be the one which is immediately under our kind of scanner. So this scaling up requires substantial, both in terms of education, training, and retraining of in-service professional. And that needs to be a kind of an area where a lot of, fortunately, that Niti Aayog prepared a report as a follow-up. There are some actions being initiated. Only yesterday, the government of Tamil Nadu, for a first time in India, a Metropolitan Development Authority has established an urban planning school in SAP Chennai for B planning course. And you'll see a lot of these things are going to come. The second part is that so far we have taken, although our cities are 80% private, most of our solution, what we give is towards the public sector. I think this capacity building, skilling, upscaling, we require a lot of involvement. We have to create position or procurement processes which enable private sector participation, right from the making of plan to training, education, and that side. I think there is a large amount of work needs to be done in this area. Thank you, and over to you, Sayan.
Thanks, Professor Bandyopadhyay, for a detailed, detailed explanation to the upskilling challenges, and also, looking at how Indian cities are different from one another. Now, I'll go back to Professor Niyogi, and this is building on from what Professor Bandyopadhyay just said. So, how do urban planners actually, ensure that the local contexts are taken care of and adopt a participatory approach while envisioning a low carbon future?
Thank you. I want to build up on the last point that was made by Professor Bandyopadhyay on changing the narrative from the large top 1% cities, the mega cities, to where we have a larger footprint with smaller cities and towns. And the real issue about, we don't necessarily have any of those, perhaps, planners significantly thinking that I'm going to be designing my city to be good for the climate. I think almost always it is the concern about expanding population, the need for an economic growth, and the services and livability become the factor. The issues are more of here and now rather than there in the future. And that mindset clearly can cannot be changed overnight. So three things. First and foremost is that we are developing most tools which we think are very useful. But when you get down to the actual implementation, they are not very usable. So this translation of the useful to usable clearly requires a very local governance and participation in the participatory mode into the process. Unless we have that, we are just going to have the set of tools which we think people should use, but they are not going to be used. That's one. Second, when we do see about the problems and the solutions, we do have this very panoramic view about the problems, which are largely top-down. We look at the images, we look at the changes in the climate, we look at the changes that could be seen with regards to our understanding of the satellite data, climate information, and so forth. And then we develop a telescopic information approach where we try to say, this is how I'm going to solve the problem that is going to be in the city. We need to change the narrative, clearly, and we need to go bottom up. And that bottom-up approach is what people often call the vulnerability approach. Rather than saying that we have a climate solution that we are going to fit for the city, the approach really is, here is a city and these are the vulnerability points. So you conduct a social vulnerability analysis, you conduct some assessments where there are going to be the hotspots of problems and places where there are opportunities for any of the changes coming through. And then build off those in terms of developing either a communication tools, a cost-benefit analysis, or finally in the context of localizing the information. Almost all the information that is being used for developing planning or solutions for the city are coming from a very large-scale global perspective. So in fact, I'm involved with two projects in India. One is through the DST on urban climate networks, and they are creating such solutions for places like Bhubaneswar, for Banaras, for Bangalore, and so forth. There's another one through the National Supercomputing Mission, trying to do the model of models of cities through CDAC and other locations, and Ajay is aware of those. It is this localization. You cannot just bring technology without the local human participation, and making this participatory model together can give us this useful to usable translation.
Thank you, Dr. Niyogi. Two very key mantras from you: useful to usable and bottom up, looking from the vulnerable sections. Yeah. Now, I mean, we've almost spent the last half an hour, and the time has been well spent, gone about in a jiffy. So I'll perhaps go around the panel with the last question of this panel. And we are looking at collaboration between national and local governments and the private sector and the consulting community like us, the academia as well, which would guarantee achievement of long-term sustainability and resilience in Indian cities. First to you, Mr. Haldar, followed by Professor Niyogi, and the last word to Professor Bandyopadhyay. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Simon. Now, see, the climate thing is a lot about science and a lot about a new way of learning, which was not there in the past. So climate goals and agendas are largely driven from the national level, like say, for example, the setting of the NDCs. Now, these need to be translated into progressively time-bound actions through the 3 tiers of government, through the public sector undertakings, which are also involved in the, say, energy space, and through the private sector. Now, in the urban sector, a lot of handholding and capacity building is required till we reach a level of maturity on climate issues. So I feel we could probably consider a countrywide climate change, urban climate change initiative, and taking off from Shashwat's point about starting with the smaller cities, on the lines of maybe a Janani or smart cities or Amrut kind of a concept, where there has been demonstrated collaborative models between the center, state, and the urban local bodies through sharing of knowledge, sharing of tools and processes, sharing of funding, and of course, building institutional capacities in the process. So in short, this is what I could immediately think of in response to your question. Thank you.
Professor Nyogi.
Yeah, I think the key aspect is each of the players really that they're going in terms of the collaboration, the way we have worked in whether it is a smart city solution or a climate resilient city framework, it is not really about technology. At the end of the day, it is about the integration of the social fiber and some of the local decisions.
Mhm.
And the more effectiveness that that system or solution can show is when we are able to solve those localized problems and then scale them up to say that this is globalization that can be implemented in other location. I really like the Bangkok presentation because that is exactly the key. I mean, you're solving a problem in a street in Bangkok, but you're saying this is solvable for say London or Austin or Dallas or wherever. So it is that localization. The second is that we are looking into the issue of the localization of information. Almost everything that we are looking right now in terms of the framework is again very large scale. And if you look at the solution space that exists right now, there is not much opportunity for, or a need rather, for innovation. Solutions are available. We just need to customize them. And so having this a global framework, whether from the academia or other or the consulting aspect of what has worked where and creating the template and then customizing it for local solution is really often what we need to do. But almost every time we are coming to the solution, it seems like we are reinventing the problem as this is unique to that city. And so creating a highly structured framework that can be modularized, that if you want to do a city trying to do this, these are the steps you need to follow.
Mhm.
This kind of a structure and modularization can actually help people and communities be more proactive that, okay, these are the steps involved and these are the approaches I need to take. Something that might be very obvious to several of us might be pretty novel to a large group of people who may not be exposed to this.
Mhm.
And I would say creating such templates and creating some modularization of the solution space would be a good way to proceed on this as we try to scale this up. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Nyogi, for your insights. Modularization and templates, which perhaps from that have evolved from the best practices, can be used elsewhere, so that we need not reinvent the wheel each time. The last word to you, Professor Bandyopadhyay, today.
Yeah, thank you. I think there are a couple of points that comes to my mind at this moment. One is about the evidences. As climate change, there are three kind of distinct pillars that we are talking about. One is science of climate, one is the mitigation and the adaptation and linked to resilience. What is broadly lacking in Indian local space and city level is the evidence. And so much of this, as you know, these are largely global circulation models, which are plates of about 200 by 150 kilometer. And that those kind of meteorological observation model needs to be downcasted. There are also some regional circulation model, and then they has to be localized. Presently, what is happening is a lot of speculation is happening. You see a model and then say, okay, the whole of Gujarat is burning. That's not true. I mean, the cities need to have, and presently that like many cities across Europe are developing climate science center or evidence building, if you are really seeing. And the second aspect of it, we are not actually realizing that we are broad brushing this nature-based solution. What is the background, how much do we need, what is the local context, because there are contradictory priority for urban space. I mean, contested space, you need housing versus industries versus green spaces. So we need to look at it. At one point of time, we are saying we have to build houses for so many urban poor. And the same time, we said, okay, we have to reserve so much of land for nature-based solution on green solution. So these are contradictory priorities, and we need evidences, clear evidences. Otherwise, we say, okay, 1 hectare is enough, or 100 hectare in a city is enough for nature-based solution. Have you done those, baseline calculation in terms of how much for a city of this size would require? So that's the first thing, and that's what both in terms of much of this urban development processes and their responses have been highly speculative and not evidence-based. And I think that area, I saw only one state which is doing very good in Kerala, where a state level disaster management agency is not only looking at the emission, they're also projecting RCP 4.5 and RCP 8.5 data is shared equally to all municipality and planning authority. And that's one, I think, great innovation we need to really build up rather than, giving. The second point is that, do we have the capacity for managing nature-based solution in urban areas? We can still plan. I mean, we know our, past experiences of managing urban forestry, urban gardens has not been. So we need a complete different set, like when you are both blue and green, because we see a lot of, nice images of nature-based solution. Some of us who has worked closely with that with Netherlands and Singapore, but it's a complete new domain of ecological engineering. Do you have this training to manage, operate? Forget about building. Building is still possible. And also, maintaining then in Gujarat, we had attempted a very similar in the waste management. And this was earthworm-based waste management. And then within 7 years, all facilities got wiped out. So how do we also building before we are recommending that we do this? So I think what we have to do, like, whenever we are saying localized climate change, we have to do little microzonation, see that what it means, what are the evidences, and are both in the regional circulation model, downscale model, and what also some of the cities are doing, they're not only looking at the future projection, they're also realigned the past evidential data to create certain basis for what would be our response in this. And thirdly, that all action has to be grounded, starting from the building level to local area level to zonal level. That would require substantial awareness creation for our local bodies, particularly not only in the planning and technical wing, but our councillor, our elected wing members. So it's a long way to go in this direction, but my recommendation would be we can, go fund more and more projects, but those projects will not derive certain benefits unless until we are actually parallelly creating a kind of evidence bank on which cities are, or at least provinces are still collecting their data and which is shared equally among all the urban centers. Thanks, Shayan, and over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Madhavada. A brief response from Professor Niyogi.
No, thank you. I love this last comment, and I wanted to expand a bit more on that. I see a lot of cities when they approach me and say, we want to come up with a climate solution. One of the inevitable conclusion that emerges is we want the cities to be green. Yes, we absolutely want the cities to be green, but nature-based solutions are not just greening and putting more trees. We don't have enough water for many of the cities. The really important thing that we need to highlight is that there is a tremendous opportunity and need for engineering solutions for cities. And those are in three very simple ways. Coming up with proper specification of the roads in terms of the reflective material that is being used. What is the thermal capacity of the roads? Second, what is the construction material that will be used in buildings and what would be their thermal capacity for the roofs? And third, the looking into aspects of ventilation if you're trying to change this thing. Even if we can come these 3 or 4 engineering-based solutions, we could actually modularize and customize solution without having to wait for put 1,000 trees and then nothing survives. So I would really close by saying, yes, we all want trees. I am a big fan of a green tree. That's how I have my backyard. But we have engineering solution as perhaps the only solution that is available to us at this time that we can reliably scale up. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Niyogi, for that perspective. Trisha, over to you. I believe we have some questions that are yet to be answered, but for positive of time and nothing else, we will take maybe one question here.
Yeah, so we just have this one last question, which I think is very relevant to all of us. So, what can India do to take up the responsibility? Am I audible?
Yes, you are. You are. You need to mute this.
Right. So we have this last question, which is kind of very relevant to all of us. So it basically says that, tackling the climate situation that we have spoken about for so long now, it's not just the responsibility of decision makers, but what can common people do in their capacity to be able to contribute to this lingering issue?
Professor Bandhavadhyay, maybe you could take that.
Okay, thank you. I think one recent initiative, I think that our Prime Minister has launched called Life for Environment. See, if you look at this whole climate change, one major aspect that most of us often ignore in professionally is the sustainable consumption aspect of it. And so I think this initiative, because only when there is a sustainable consumption, then the other chain can work effectively, although there will be always, whether there will be mitigation deficit, adaptation deficit, or resilience deficit. But one area which is very importantly being launched, that how we can actually reduce our consumption, that probably will provide certain direction, and that's a very important policy initiative. The second part of it, in every stages, whether it is mitigation, adaptation, resilience, we have to de-jargonize these words. Because from a common society, from a people living in common area, that very recently, I'll just give you an example that during this last summer was been very harsh in Ahmedabad. So what we did as a part of one course, our students surveyed 200 people who are at the street, either selling vegetables, selling this. And the response was that they don't see any change in the heat intensity. Although we have been, all workshops and academia, research, we are, almost shouting, screaming, the heat stress and India is burning. But if you go common man, common society and ask them, and so there you get a completely different perception. So one thing is there is a gap. We have to bridge this gap because, that we have to, we don't become only sole custodian of environment, climate change. A city belongs to 6 million, 8 million population. Idea is to that how we create a bhagidari and partnership so that this level of, whether it is sustainable consumption in terms of mitigation, adaptation, the whole chain, there is a participation. And this is necessary. Otherwise, we'll have 100 more workshops and still we'll be same place where we started.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Bandhavadhyay, for that. And it's a befitting answer to the session, which has been titled as Joining Hands for Net Zero. Dr. Pradhan, I would close the session here. I would hand it over to you for the vote of thanks, please.
Thank you, Sayan, and you have done a wonderful job and most difficult job being a moderator to do this session moderating. I think before I thank all the colleagues, panelists, and the speakers, let me just give you one line of my conclusion, what I gained. And I learned a lot actually here, certainly. I just saw what is missing and what has been stressed upon. One was actually institutional capacity building and, strengthening this upskilling, which is mentioned, which is very much required towards net zero. Framework template, which is, of course, I don't agree always that is a system approach, but I always feel that not it's one size fits to all cities. I disagree a little bit with them, but yeah, that's a system approach and other thing there. There is something which is very important towards net zero, is circular economy. And we need to really stress upon that towards getting zero. People's participation and engagement in the community is very, very important to achieve that. Without that, you can't do it. And that's one thing I know. Saswat is an urban planner, and I know I go to SEPT often to give lecture. But we miss actually most of the master plan happen. They never integrate stormwater, drainage, transport in an integrated manner. It's in a piecemeal basis. So integrate all aspects, which is very like a flood, drought, and everything. Help develop revenue model, which is actually very important. You might get some money from the Niti Aayog central, but I think the city need to really come out of that. The last but not the least, innovation and research, which is we've been talking and all, and that need every city to really do that. With this, I thank everyone. Let me thank Susma, Anurag, Sarla, all the three presenter in the first session. They really set the tone for the cities, how they're going, urban planning, sustainability, and also how the floods and other things also part of cities. I thank you for three speakers for a wonderful presentation. I'm sure that all participants have learned a lot, and if they have any questions, they'll do that. Thank you again. I thank Professor, my dear friend Dev, who woke up in the morning at Austin and to be here. And enjoy listening to him talking about the research on climate, urban climate, all kind of things. I think fantastic, Dev, for joining and accepting at a very short notice to be in a panel. Thank you so much, Professor Saswat. Thank you very much for joining from CEPT. I think I have heard several students coming from CEPT, and I enjoy working that. And you have been a pioneer in urban regional planning, including environmental planning. I think thank you very much for your policy intervention. I think those are important aspects we need to really take it up. Subha, my dear friend, I have seen for long. He moved to Noida. I used to see often next in the sports club in second. But yeah, so Subha, fantastic. Always you are passionate about urban planning, integrating smart cities. I think that's fantastic of you, and you are doing a wonderful job. Thank you very much, all panelists. Thank you all the participants for your patience and your questions, your interaction. I think we enjoyed as much as you enjoyed, and we hope that our members and participants take away some of the key learnings from here. We'll definitely come back if any questions are there. We'll offline respond to individual participants. We have all details. We also have a recording and all. It will be in the YouTube, and it can be sent to the SAN. I think thank you very much. I think I would fail to not if I don't thank Acharya Sahab, who actually we've been talking to really discuss that how to take this urban, because this is something which we have been discussing and challenging ourselves. And thank you for supporting as Mott McDonald, your passion, your interest in sustainable cities and decarbonization cities, and how really India can leapfrog from some of the learnings you have done or projects you have done in UK and other parts. I think that was our interest as an Indian consulting engineering fraternity to have them. So I think thank you very much, Science most interesting, and I think I'll fail also if I don't thank you, Trista, Abhimanyu, and colleagues there, and my colleagues at CAI, who have been, doing this. I think we had almost 250 people registered. We had online almost 130 people, and we had YouTube also screening and Facebook screening. I think this is quite successful. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.